that any supposed conservative would support a statement like that is it really seems oxymoronic, doesn't it?
This is another Petersonism. He talks about political affiliation. He says that from the research that's coming out based on personality, that political affiliation is almost exclusively determined by your personality. Mm-hmm. It's not, you don't choose your political affiliation, your personality chooses it for you. Mm-hmm. With like really, really disturbingly high percentages. It really questions a lot of, people say, well, I'm a conservative because blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. Really, it appears that people are conservative because of a single issue. And the single issue is how permeable should borders be. That's the single issue that determines that, and that's largely a personality trait.
Right.
It's related to conscientiousness and disgust sensitivity. And Peterson says that it's a reasonable thing to have in light of the way that diseases have changed the way the planet looks. For example, Native Americans did not have they didn't have a high disgust sensitivity towards these Europeans who came over. And the Europeans were just teeming with all sorts of, diseases that the Native Americans didn't know about. Like there were essentially no sort of viral bacterial diseases in the Americas before Europeans came. The major source of sickness was parasites. Mm-hmm. And so Native Americans and Latin Americans, South Americans had really good parasite resistance, but very, very poor viral and bacterial resistance. Mm-hmm. And Europeans had very poor parasitic resistance, but very good viral and bacterial resistance. And so that's part of the reason that so many Indians, Native Americans, just got wiped out by these European diseases. They just had no immune anything to it. So anyway, conservatism as a developed trait, with its single issue being how permeable should borders be, is useful in light of your society getting wiped out from disease, right? And,
sure.
and Europeans, of course, have a lot of experience with this on the continent of Europe as well. So with all the plagues and stuff that have happened there. Mm-hmm. So if you think about conservatives as people who were born with high disgust sensitivity, then you can understand why they would reflexively want tight borders. Is you want to keep things organized, you want to keep things in their place, and you want to minimize the transmission of disease. And this is one, you can hear it in the language they use to talk about Mexicans in this case, let's say, right? Mm-hmm. Like even using the term, saying somebody's a Mexican is almost becoming like a racial slur now.
Oh, it is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it implies all sorts of stuff like they're dirty and they're going to bring, they're intellectually dirty, right? They're uneducated. They don't integrate well, whatever that means. They're going to bring all their lazy work ethic, which is funny because they work so hard. But it's the language that gets used is like a disease parasite language. Like we don't want them coming here because they're going to bring the disease that is them. And you could actually talk about, like the Zika virus or something like that. You could actually talk about real diseases, which they're not, but they're using the same language of worrying about, these foreigners bringing pestilence in or something like that, which is in line with the fact that they probably didn't choose to be conservatives. They were probably born with high disgust, and this is an opportunity for them to express their disgust and enforce strong borders, which is as Peterson says, the single issue that determines whether you're a conservative or not a conservative.
While they're tipping back a margarita made from tequila from Mexico.
Yeah. Well, and the irony with American conservatives is the Christianity, because Jesus' admonition to be merciful and to treat others as I have treated you, is a very unconservative message. It's a message of acceptance and open arms in the extreme, kind of, right?
It is extreme. It's to your own detriment.
Well,
extreme.
he was an extreme liberal back then, during his time, right?
Yes, we could say, right. I agree with that. I think, yeah, I agree with that. And that's one of the weird things about American conservatives, is that they're super, super closed borders, which is their personality. But then they claim to be all about Jesus, who told you, his teaching is basically overcome your programming, like dig deep, seek to live as I have lived, seek to overcome your human instinct, and treat others as spiritual beings, not as dirty animals that you want over there and not here. And it's hard. It's hard to do. It takes work. At no point does he say it's going to be easy. So anyway, that's, I think, the contradiction we're seeing.
And the state compounds the issue because there is no private property, right? There's no way to really, in my view anyway, let's say with the disease portion, we want to, whatever. That might be a good reason, but there's no way to enforce that without the use of the force of the state. And that's where I'm done. I can't go along with that. I can't go along with the state violence. I can't go along with state enforcement. I can't go along. I mean, as soon as they say the state is, I'm done. Okay, then I'm against it. I'm against it. It doesn't matter. Because, like Claudio said, the state is, and you said also, it's not just the enemy of the family. It's the enemy of God. The state's the enemy of mankind. It's the opposite of all good. So if, like Claudio said, you can't serve two masters. So I can't even support anything the state does. If they're going to say that, well, we're going to have the troops on the border okay, I'm against that. So it's hard, it's hard to even have an opinion about the border that's really rational because the state's in the middle of it. I mean, on my own property, I don't want everyone and their dog just to show up in my house. Okay, that's natural. But I can't get myself to say I want the state to stop people either.
Right.
Come into the country. I mean, what is even a country? I don't even know what that is. What is this big, massive land? Why do Americans get to have it? We took it from natives. We took it from Indians. I mean, Dave, you brought up
ancestors did.
The diseases, right.
Yeah.
Right, we didn't do it. But diseases, Americans sent the Indians blankets with smallpox to kill them off.
Yeah.
So
yeah, some of it was intentional. There's some interesting books on a lot of that. I think it appears that less of it was intentional than is popularly believed. So what it looks like there is you have kind of Columbus and a few other Europeans coming over in the late 1400s, early 1500s, and then there's a gap. There's a gap of several decades, almost a century, where no one from Europe really came over, and then the next ships that came over took the same routes. There was a guy. There was a guy who was a young boy on one of the early expeditions to the Americas, and then he was an old man. He kind of took his last voyage after this gap, and they took the same route, and he was looking forward to seeing all these Native Americans. And when they sailed down along New England there, all of the villages were gone. They were either abandoned or burned or just gone, like the trees had overgrown them.
Yeah, they just found bones. That's all they found.
They just found piles and piles of bones. And much of that was not malicious. It was just like, hey, we have incompatible immune systems, and they there were decades and decades of death from the diseases that came over. And so the second time they came over, kind of the Manifest Destiny era, let's call it, where the colonies really got populated, everyone was kind of already dead, it appears. But still, you know, like, okay, so there's empty land, and you got some of it. But what's especially funny with the Mexican California thing is, like, what are your city names? You know, San Jose, Los Angeles, you know, like San Mateo, you know,
San Diego,
like,
San Antonio.
check out any of the towns in that area. Like, they all have names from when someone else owned them, or when they were, you know, occupied by a different population with a different language. Well, what population was that, and what language was it? Not a huge mystery, but you know, only one state gets to claim ownership of it, even though the populations are essentially integrated. If anybody's ever spent time in Southern California, there's no doubt that the American and Mexican populations are, you know, integrated to some extent there pretty effectively. So the conflict just seems totally unnecessary to me. I don't understand it.
What I found from reading stuff, different comments from, maybe we'll call them the alt-right and stuff, is that a lot of, at least the vocal ones, are a little bit beyond just borders too. They don't like people because they're black. They don't like people because they're brown. They want to get rid of all of them and just have their nice little European culture. Which, you know, if they want to go start their little private society with Europeans, that's great. Don't get the state involved in it. That's my beef with the whole thing. Don't get the state involved with it. And you can't. I just don't see how you can.
Yeah, now that they have precedent for using separation of young children from their mothers as a deterrent, how long will it be until they start using this technique domestically?
Right.
Send your kid to public school. Yeah, well, we'll just take them from you. And they have in the past.
Yeah.
It's,
or you don't get to take your newborn home from the hospital if you have outstanding debts or whatever.
Or, or you don't get to take them home if you don't give them the vaccinations or whatever they are before they go. I know that. Seen it. Thought I was going to have to blow a hospital up.
Or take them away if you haven't had them at home.
Right. We got a full board. You guys want to take a call here right before the top of the hour?
Sure.
You want to stay on for that, Dave?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool. Hello, caller, you're up. Thanks for holding.
Yeah, about the smallpox blankets, that was a story from the 1820s. I think it was supposed to be Jackson that did that. But they didn't have germ theory worked out back then. They didn't know how germs spread. They really only figured that out around World War I. So the story's not really true.
Huh, okay.
But anyway, you know, I'm a Catholic, but one thing that moved me away from it a lot is the idea that, because it is, you're right, it used to be, not anymore, it was a strong traditional family values, regardless of all the religious differences between all the actual religious stuff. It was very focused on the family. But to me, you know, telling people south of the border that it's okay to have Maria and Jose with 3 peanut butter sandwiches, get on a train and head north. Remember that when they had the whole children wave come up to the border?
Yeah.
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 You know what? That's not family values.
No.
That's child abuse. And so I'm like, okay. And then the Catholic Church was like, well, listen, if it's going to bring more Catholics in here, and I'm saying this as someone that's part of it, that's cool, man. Like, you know, whatever. Like, don't be a hater. The Bible says let children with, you know, backpacks wandering around in your country, you know, where are the parents? You know what I mean? They can't even just, like, issue something to their local diocese and say, hey, man, are you guys getting the message through on Sunday? Because they're sending their kids out on trains with just letting them go. That's not what we're trying to teach. And, they didn't do that. And I was like, this is just politics. This is just economics. This is money. This is power. that the church wants, because they see, well, hey, the demographic trends mean maybe we'll flip this country from being a Protestant country to a Catholic country. I can't get behind that. That's ridiculous. And, you know, look at how Mexicans treat Native Americans. I used to go there all the time. I had a girlfriend down there. Look how they treat Native Americans down there, like the Mayans. Not very well. So to tell me, oh, you know, the Native Americans, you killed them all off here, and we got to come in. And it's like, dude, there are people in this country that are not going to be treated very well when this place turns into Mexico Part 2. Not very well at all. So don't tell me that. And then they got a wall with Guatemala, and then they put the Guatemalans in jail and treat them terribly when they come through Mexico because they want to move too. They want to, you know, pass through the country too. They don't treat them. All the stuff the caller said about you got to treat people this way, they don't do that. So don't tell me about it if you're not doing it to other people.
Yeah, that's a good point. Although Jesus' message wasn't to love your friends and hate your enemies, right? Do we remember what Jesus said?
Right.
He said to love your enemies as well.
Right. But I mean, I feel at some point, you know, you look at stories from the Bible like the Tower of Babel, which is pretty much what this country's turning into. You look at the Old Testament, Israel. I mean, they had a very clear idea of who they were. They weren't like, hey, even in the New Testament when they asked Jesus to go to the Roman, I think it's the legionnaire's son, and he makes a very clear statement that, hey, these are Romans.
Yeah.
You know, we're Hebrews. This is a Roman guy. And he kind of had to be convinced. And they said, hey, he put in a lot of money to help us build a temple or a synagogue or something like that. Like, this guy's kind of our friend. He's, you know, he's an ally. And he goes, okay, all right, heads over there and helps him out. But in the beginning, he's like, that's a Roman guy.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there was that thing where, you know, he said to the Samaritan woman, he said, well, why should I help you? You're not a Jew, or Israelite. And she said, well, even the dogs will take the scraps from the master's table.
Right. Well, Samaritans were 50-50. Samaritans were a group of Hebrews that had interbred with a pagan tribe nearby. They're still there, by the way. There's only 300 or 400 of them. They still live on that same mountain that you hear about them in Israel, modern-day Israel. They still live there. And, yeah, and so they had been basically kicked out for hanging out with pagans and kind of getting the religion, as they interbred, as they changed to religion, they weren't, you know, it's a purity spiral. They got kicked out. But, you know, he brings it up and says, you're a Samaritan. But then at the same time, he says, you know, hey, the Good Samaritan, you know, helped out this guy. The rabbis walked by him, wouldn't even help him out. But the guy's making these demands about, like, taking in foreigners. We have the highest percentage of foreign-born people in this country in our whole history. Like, where is the limit? Like, what are you talking about?
Well, I get what you're saying, too. And that's why I said that this is it's a conundrum for me, because I can't, where I draw the line is I can't support the state being the one to doing this stuff. And then there's then who's going to do it? But I don't know. But I can't support the state, which I think is the enemy of the family. It's the enemy of the people. But this time I'm just going to go, you know, we'll use them for this motive, whatever. It just doesn't sit well with me. I can't do it.
Well, let me ask you this from a libertarian, because I like a lot of libertarian perspectives. I don't know if I'm technically one myself, but there does seem to be a split between those who sort of the open border folks, but they also say, hey, cut out the welfare state.
Yeah.
So anyone can come over, but you don't get a Social Security number that was actually from a dead World War II vet, and then you get these programs, and then you get to send your kid to school, and the kid gets tuition free no matter where they are, and then you get an EBT card. There's a libertarian, sort of the right side of libertarianism, that says, yes, they can come in, but they don't get anything.
Right.
And I think that would be the way to square it as far as the libertarian perspective is like, if the border people are wrong, if I'm wrong, if a lot of it, which could be, but you eliminated the reason for them to be coming here, which is money, and a lot of it is redistribution of wealth. So you get taxed, you own a business, you get taxed a bunch, and a lot of that goes to stuff you probably wouldn't pay for if someone just walked up to you and said, "Give me your cash. I need to
Absolutely.
do X, Y, and Z."
That's a really good point. And I think that is, if you take that incentive away, there would probably be a lot less immigration to America. And I go a step further, like I said, with the Syrian situation in Europe. Quit bombing the crap out of these places, and they might stay there.
Right.
You know, quit having pineapple wars in South America and making their country crappy. Quit having drug wars down there and making their country even worse. And maybe they'll stay there. You know, if America wants to have, if America wants to stay America and they don't want foreigners and stuff like this, instead of saying, well, just send them back and tell them to make their own country better and leave us alone, we have to take that to heart and not make their countries worse, because America does make a lot of countries worse with our policies. We like to rule the whole world. We need to mind our own business, take care of America, and
totally agree.
Quit messing with those other people and allow them to make their country better. I mean, if we want to make Guatemala better, instead of having, you know, and I do remember that story where they were saying, hey, come to America because you can get on welfare. Your kids will be taken care of.
Right.
Get rid of the welfare part. That would take care of a lot of that. Open up trade with freaking Guatemala more. I don't even know what our trade is with them, but open it up more. Make it easier make it easier for them to have a good country. It just seems like to me the American state makes the whole world harder to live in. It really does.
Absolutely.
And it sucks. And everyone looks at America and goes, well, you know what? No one's attacking them. Might be a good place to live. and they got welfare. Might be a good place to live. That's my biggest problem with it, is that you have these state incentives to come here. You have state incentives to leave where they are because of our state. And then we use the state to keep them out. You know, it's just a big mess. Get rid of the incentives. Get rid of the foreign entanglements and foreign mingling, and then let's see what happens.
I agree. We are the number one chaos agent worldwide, and I think the caller, even though I'm criticizing the caller, I think he mentioned that, and I totally agree with it about, you know, Mexico, for example, last 15 years, I think 60, 70,000 people have been killed in their drug war. I mean, it's
terrible.
It's nuts, but do we have any connection to that? Do any alphabet soup agencies run around down there all the time?
Yeah.
I'm against that, but at the same time, I'm one man, one person saying that, you know, and every voice counts, but to kind of call up and then scripturally, I don't see it, but at the same time, it's just a defense mechanism, man. It's just like a squid squirts ink when it's threatened. It's like Trump's basically saying, hey, man, you guys can't be doing this. It is a statist perspective. But, I mean, it's like there are other people in this country, man. Like, I travel a lot. I go to Asia, and I can remember, like, people coming up and saying the most outlandish racist things about black people. And they're like, I want to move to America, but I don't want to live around black people. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't think you can come in then. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then you look at, like, a lot of the Hispanic stuff, they firebomb people out of Southern California. Yeah. Like Compton, where all the gangster avenues, that's Hispanic territory now. Yeah. Like, it's race-based, man. Like, and then you're calling up and telling me about Jesus, and, like, you can't stop us now because Jesus, and it's like, and then, you know, you actually read the Bible, not the part that these moron pastors tell you, the little feel-good take-home messages, but the part where it's like the whole Testament is about a tribe by birth, by blood. I mean, give me a break, man. And I understand the New Testament is different. It has a much different message, but still, there's still examples in there where it's like straight from Christ himself talking about differences between tribes and peoples. And then it's just like, oh, this needs to be a Karl Marx open borders thing.
No, I don't think so. I think it's more of it's a personal call. And I think that's what I'm trying to say anyways. And I think even Claudio, I know Claudio very well. It's a personal call. The angst and the hatred and all this and that, which turns into using the state to enforce these things. It's more of a personal call of, hey, check yourself. Why are you this way? Why do you want the state to do these things? It's more of a, make sure you got your own stuff figured out before you start casting the stone at the other people. And again, it still goes back to, even Trump, well, you got to quit doing this. If he really wants to stop it, he needs to stop the incentives.
Right.
I think so much would be fixed if the incentives were gone. And, we hear fluff talk about it, but no one's really doing anything about it. And it's not just the welfare thing. It's a broad spectrum, like I was saying. I think it's a big issue. It's a hard issue. And I blame the state all the way around for it, for the reason why they're coming here. And I blame them I just don't like the state taking kids from their parents. There's just something in me that says that's not right.
Well, the incentive is that they're coming here to, pick vegetables for a low price, to provide us with food for a lower price. Don't get rid of that incentive. Keep that one.
Well, there's those too. I mean,
keep the market incentive. Get rid of the socialist incentive.
Right. Yeah.
Hey guys, great show. I'll keep listening.
Hey, appreciate the call. It's good discussion. Appreciate it. Either you two got something you want to add there before we go on to the next one?
No, that was super good. What's funny about those are really good points. What's interesting about it, I suppose, is that you can see the trap of thinking in terms of the state. As soon as you begin to process that issue in terms of statism, it draws you into all these pragmatic conclusions, right? And there's nothing wrong with pragmatism. It's great. But, pragmatism is where the idea of mutually assured destruction comes from, nuclear war, right?
Yeah.
Pragmatically speaking, your enemies are going to make nuclear bombs, and so you have to. And then pragmatically speaking, if you have them as well, then they're going to put them on intercontinental ballistic missiles so they can deliver them from further away without putting their airplanes at risk and without having airplanes that can be shot down. So then you need to build ICBMs. And then if they have enough to destroy your biggest cities, you need to have enough to destroy their biggest cities. And then if they can launch all theirs at once and wipe out your whole country in a first strike, you need to be able to launch all of yours at once. So as soon as you detect that they've launched, you can launch. And that way both countries will be totally destroyed. All of that is logical. All of it's pragmatic. As soon as you step into the realm of thinking in terms of statism instead of thinking in terms of individuals and mercy and forgiveness and Christianity, you're done. It's over.
Yeah, I think that's a key point there, and both you brought it up is what would you do as the individual, because that's the answer.
Yeah, good point.
The values you're talking about, the values that Jesus would profess. That's about improving yourself as an individual.
It's
to do unto others as you would have them do unto to you. That improves yourself. That improves your your ability to your higher thinking abilities. It improves your ability to have opportunities in the future.
Another thing too, and I struggle with it myself personally. Some of these things that, like Christ said, with loving your enemies and stuff, that wasn't a call to, unless it's to your detriment. Mm-hmm. It might be to your detriment. Mm-hmm. Here's my commandment. Mm-hmm. It may not be the best thing for you. Here's my commandment.
Yeah.
You might not think it's the best thing for you, but he was thinking of another realm, not the earthly realm.
Yeah, if you respond to it out of fear, which is what the state wants you to do, you respond to it out of fear, and I'm going to respond to my enemy by destroying him because I was told he did something bad, right? I'm told they knocked down the towers, therefore I am going to destroy all of them. Where does that originate? In the brain. Where does that response originate? Fear. The R complex, the reptilian brain, the lowest part of the brain. When you respond with the state's answer, you're responding with the lowest part of your brain. You're not responding with the higher thinking abilities. When you respond with the message of that Christ gave, or even go into Buddhism or any of that, this is responding with the higher portion of the brain. And that improves you as a person, and it improves opportunities in the future.
Think about how many people were against Homeland Security when they were doing the airplane stuff, right? Airplane checks. Because we weren't scared of that. Like, I got on a plane, I wasn't worried about it getting blown up. And I despise the Homeland Security people for doing the things that they did for me to get on that plane. How many people like Homeland Security now because they're on the border? They're still the same entity.
Yeah. It's easy to capture a reptile, but not something that can actually think.
Yep. You guys ready to go to a new one?
Yeah.
Yeah, rock and roll.
Hello, caller. You're up next. Thanks for holding.
How y'all doing?
Good.
Getting into philosophy, that makes it interesting, doesn't it?
Sometimes.
Yeah, the whole thing with the nuclear weapon example with pragmatism, I wouldn't call that pragmatism, and you're really going to the extreme to use the nuclear weapon theory, because that goes as far back, and it's not pragmatism, it's human instinct, it's survival. It goes back to the caveman who wanted a larger spear, a bigger club, to protect his woman from the guy in the next cave, literally. It's human nature. See where I'm coming from?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a fact. And as far as the religious aspect, more people in this world have been killed in the name of religion, whichever one it was, because people were fighting for their God, than any other reason on the face of the earth. And as far as the state, yeah, the state really sucks. When I had the business, I know how much they robbed me and the missus for. And when she passed away, I retired. Business went in her name, so I burned all the records. And I did rough math. I'm getting a little long in the tooth, but I'd have to hit 134 to ever recoup our money.
Wow.
Don't think I'm going to do that well. You know what I mean? And you're talking about not supporting the state. You avidly support the state, Joshua.
I know. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm just saying, it's a statement. You avidly support the state. You keep talking about you can't support the state, but you avidly support them. And you don't have to. But the greed aspect is stronger than the hatred for the state, because the wealth is loved better than the freedom. And I'll make one other statement you ought to think about. I can't believe you guys have never mentioned Jefferson as much as you're into the Founding Fathers. Jefferson's printing of the Quran.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever see that?
Yeah.
You remember the warning that was on the first inside page?
No, I don't.
I don't remember it verbatim. I'm sorry for that. But it was basically a warning about how violent this book is. And it was a printing of the original Quran that does not have the text and the literally pages removed that your quote-unquote good Muslims remove to practice their brand of Islam. And I'm not a religious man, but I believe there's a man watching the books. Which of man's contrived religions is correct? I don't know. But I believe there's a man watching the books. And I just wanted to throw those things out there. You know, everybody hates the state, but everybody continues to support it. And so did I. But as long as that happens, and I heard a line, I can't even tell you what radio show it was on, but what the guy said was, there'll never be a revolution in this country as long as the people are fat and happy, and they're fat and happy.
Oh, yeah. That's good. That's true.
You kids have a good day.
All right. Thanks. I was trying to find this while he was talking, but there's been religion stuff. There was, I believe, quite a few more people killed
Yeah, I looked
from
up
the
for
religion of the state
Yeah, it's
in the 20th century alone.
referring to religion being the cause of wars. Only 7% of the wars in history have actually been attributed to religious wars.
But
The rest are
there's another way to
territorial
look- There's
wars.
another way to look at that, too.
Sure.
This guy Charles McCarthy talks about it. Pretty fun. Caller brought up a really good point about that, a common point about religion. And I agree with him in terms of religion. I don't think we were talking about religion. I think we were talking about faith.
Right,
And-
wars between states.
And McCarthy says, Jesus says, you shouldn't just refrain from murder. You should refrain from being angry, right? And then in the same, this is Sermon on the Mount, I think, right? He says, the law says thou shalt not commit adultery, but I tell you the truth, don't look at another woman with lust in your heart. And he's saying a couple things there. One, he's saying if you don't allow your mind to go down the road, then you'll never commit the action. If you don't allow yourself to think about how you would be violent, you won't be violent. If you don't think about how you would kill someone, you won't kill them, right? And there's another side of it, too, that McCarthy brings up. If, let's say, 9 out of 10 of the Christians are adulterous, would you say that Christianity is an adulterous religion? Or would you say that they're not following the teaching of Christ?
Right.
Because Christ is extremely unambiguous about that. He's also extremely unambiguous about killing people. It's just totally unambiguous. So it's fine to say, I think it's actually accurate to say that there have been many religious wars. But to say that those people were following the teaching of Christ, I think that would be a much harder statement to stand by. I think you could say that their religion was a very, very severe distortion of the teachings of Christ. When he says, love one another as I have loved you, I think that precludes war. I believe.
I think you're right. I mean, it's a non. Don't got to think about it.
Well, yeah. So there's never been a Christian war.
Well, it depends on how you define, Christian, and I think the caller was talking about religious groups warring with each other, which for sure is a historical fact.
Yeah.
But that is when you interpret religion, or it's when you interpret Christ's teaching in the paradigm of statism. Again, as soon as you step into using violence to get your way, you're no longer talking about Christianity.
Right.
You're talking about something totally different. You can use the same language to talk about both of them, but you're not talking about the same thing anymore. Right?
Right.
They're completely incompatible. The means and methods of Jesus and state institutions are totally incompatible with each other. There's no compatibility whatsoever. So you could use the same words, but they mean different things in the two different contexts.
Yeah, and you can also look at, like, religious. Everyone assumes God is on their side when they go to war, whichever God it is. I mean,
Yeah, got it. Yeah, sure, right.
I mean, the states support that and encourage that. Whether you were Japan, the sun god's on our side, the emperor is on our side. If you're America, the Jesus is on our side. If you're Germans, and Jesus is on your side. And if you're Soviets, I don't know who they I don't know. Can't really say there. The state is on our side.
Well, it would just be the the common man.
Right.
They're all gods, right? They're all gods.
Yep.
In that they all supersede the individual somehow, or transcend the individual.
Right. Well, we still got a full board of callers here. Let's take them. Hello, caller, you're up next.
Yeah, I need to call again just to. I question that thing that immigrants come here for welfare, because I'm an immigrant too.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the conditions for me to get my green card to come here, because I was married with America, was that I would not in any way sign up for welfare. And actually I had to have people, sponsors, that would sign an affidavit that said they would take care of me if I need the welfare, so I wouldn't go to welfare and get a welfare.
No kidding.
So a lot of this is a piece of crap propaganda from conservatives. I don't doubt that people go around the law and do something like that, but I don't think it's as much as people are preaching about, because it's illegal. Immigrants do not qualify for welfare in any way. Okay?
Yeah.
Another thing, look around you. Don't look at what the TV is saying, or don't look what government say. Look around you and see. Look at the immigrants. Are they lazy butts, or they are working hard? Look at the people that you met. You go like south, you go in Arizona, for example. You go there and Home Depot buy something. Man, there's a lot of immigrants there on the Home Depot to do a work for you and work cheap. Okay, they're not staying home collect the welfare. They are going for. How many Americans you see on unemployed, you see on the front of the Home Depot waiting for some kind of work to come, some menial job to come? They're not. It's easier for them to get welfare. But it's not as easy for the immigrants to get welfare as the way people are portraying. And the other thing about the religions, I think communism itself killed a lot more people than any other religion. And they are atheists. Mm-hmm. So I don't agree on that neither. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks.
Comments?
Yeah, he's right. My wife came here. She originally came over here on a work visa, and she was working in Maine at an amusement park, and living in a cabin with 5 other people. Of course, there's no welfare. And then when we got married, I was working as a starving pilot for very, very low pay, and moonlighting on the side to make ends meet. And for a while, I didn't think we were actually going to be able to meet the requirements that were necessary to qualify for her green card. And we almost didn't. We just barely made it, because it was based on the previous year's tax return, and when I was making even less money as a pilot. So that put a tremendous amount of stress on me. But we've never taken welfare or food stamps, never even taken unemployment, and my wife is the same mindset. She's not going to take it. So this idea that immigrants come here and are trying to get welfare is, when you look at it practically, it's really a bogus idea. They come here because there's market opportunity. Many of them come from a completely socialist. Many of them come from a completely socialist country where you don't even have markets available like you have here. But it turns out it's the people who are here, who are born here, who are turning to the idea of socialism and destroying the markets.
See, I wonder how much of it is fear-based, by the state or different political entities, Republican state, for a power base. You know, kind of like the Dennis Rodman when he said, yeah, the Uncle June or whatever that was fed to the dogs happened to be sitting behind me during the basketball game.
Right.
You know, or, you know, some of the stuff that we hear about Mexico or some other country, you know, oh, you can't go there because you'll get shot or whatever. Dave, you spent a pretty good long time down in Mexico, and you spent time in, was it Paraguay or Uruguay or something like that?
Ecuador.
Ecuador, okay.
Which is pretty mild. And Iraq.
Oh, yeah.
Without Americans. I was in Iraq with Iraqis only. There were no, I did not see any Americans for 3 weeks while I was in Iraq.
Wow.
And I managed to not get killed. Which is not to say that people don't get killed and kidnapped there all the time. It happens all the time. But it doesn't happen to 100% of people. Kind of like crime stats in Chicago. Like, Chicago's a brutally vicious city unless you take out, like, 10 or 20 blocks. If you take out 10 or 20 square blocks of Chicago, it's totally peaceful. So it really depends on how you look at it.
What about time you spent in Mexico?
Well, yeah. Again, I had a wonderful experience. Nothing got stolen. We didn't even really get ripped off like the tourist way. But I tend not to get ripped off the tourist way because I can detect when people are bull crapping me, and I tend just to look at them in a very unimpressed way, and it appears to work across cultures. But I'm gonna be a broken record for a little bit here. Can you talk about immigration outside of the presuppositions of statism? Is it possible to use the word immigrant outside of the paradigm of the state?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so either. So yet again, we're being pulled into thinking in terms of abstractions about how people should be controlled by an external authority, which is part of the reality we live in. We live in a reality with external authorities, and there are pros and cons to them. There are some benefits, and there are some detriments. But as individuals who are not part of the state, per se, like none of us are elected officials or anything, why would we even think in terms of immigrants? Why wouldn't we think in terms of people? Could we think in terms of people instead? Would that be possible? And then we could talk about there are people who we would like to live in our communities, and there are people we would not want to live in our communities. And we can all nod our heads and agree on that one. I think, right?
Absolutely.
And so, but to say Mexican immigrants, what does that mean? Is that an 8-year-old girl or a 37-year-old MS-13 guy? You know, or is it maybe it's a 37-year-old MS-13 guy who's had a moment of repentance and wants to change his life and be someone different? We don't know. When we use the term Mexican immigrant, we exclude the possibility of thinking about these people, which is what they are. They're people, as individuals who we may or may not want to live in our communities. And then we're treating them as caricatures, right? We're dealing with an abstraction, a singular abstraction for all these people. Are they lazy? Do they work hard? Are they criminals? Are they peaceful? Well, they're all of these things. But if we just talk about them as Mexican immigrants, then we can't talk about the fact that some of them are wonderful people who would make the society that we are in better, and some of them probably aren't great people. And maybe they should move to Washington, D.C. to hang out with people who are like them. You know, there are places, there's probably a place for, you know, in America's a very diverse place. You could probably find a place where, quote-unquote, immigrants from all different parts of the world and all different backgrounds would fit in nicely. And there's definitely cities in America where sociopathic criminals would fit in really great.
Yep. And Washington, D.C. is one of them.
D.C. would be a good place for them. There's a few other places, and they would get along great, and they would They would make the community more of what it wants to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that, I guess, is why, that's really interesting. They are people, and it's states that turn things into sex, right?
Well, this is identity politics, right?
Right.
You could almost say that all politics are identity politics.
That's Marxism. Because isn't Marx the one that told us about the classes and the thises and the thoses and the thisms and stuff instead of just people?
Yeah. His big thing was the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, right? The working class and the ruling class. He said there were only two. There's only two classes of people in the whole world. Now, what's interesting is you have, so that's Marxism. You have Bernie Sanders style socialists, which are interesting too. Because one of the conundrums that Bernie Sanders had, being a quasi-Marxist, was that he was a nationalist Marxist, which is tricky because, in theory, Marx thought that the working class of the world should unite against the ruling class of the world, and that the working class should hold hands across borders and overthrow their global oppressors. But when you introduce nationalism, how do you do that? Who's worse, a foreigner from the working class or a ruler from your own country? It gets hard to answer that question, right?
From the Marxist class.
Well, when you mix Marxism and nationalism, this is the problem that modern neo-Marxists, we did a podcast on these guys, right?
Yep.
This is a problem that they refer to as the problem of intersectionality. So who's more, and the game is, so you step into the realm of statism. So you're only talking about groups. You're no longer talking about individuals. And you're talking about group rights, not individual rights. And you're talking about how groups should be treated, not how individuals should be treated. And your presupposition, your starting point, for what is right and what is wrong is whoever is the most oppressed is the most correct. Okay? So, but you're only talking about groups. So who is the most oppressed? You could say, let's say that black people in America and women in America are two oppressed groups in America. Okay? Now, what if you have a black woman in America? She would probably be more oppressed, right? But what about a black man? A black man is half part of the patriarchy, but half part of the oppressed minority. So where does he fit into that? And if there's a protest, does he get to come to the protest, or is he being protested? So this is the same thing. As soon as you step outside of individuals and Jesus telling us to treat one another as I have treated you, not love one another, not love your neighbor as yourself. That's the Old Testament. Not love your neighbor as yourself, because a lot of people hate themselves. It's love one another as I have loved you, which is infinitely. As soon as you step into statism, you're done with that. You're out of it. It's impossible to do what Jesus said. As soon as you step into the paradigm of groups and states.
Yep.
Absolutely impossible. And so the discussion shifts, and it ends up being weird. And you can make sense of a lot of the discussion, but you can't square it with anything resembling what Christ told us to do.
Which is why states are so handy for people, because when you take it to individualism, if someone who's a closed border person, completely, and I won't even say it that way, someone who's for the state closing the border, enforcing the border, if they were the one on the border, would they be able to turn around the mother individual with their baby, the individual, and her husband, the individual, and say, no, turn around and go back where you came from? Make your own country better first, Jack. Probably not. But it's a lot easier to use the state to do it, because then what they want done, what they think they want done, is being done. And it's being done to a group, and it's being done by the state. I'm not the one doing it.
Yeah, it's abstracted from their daily life.
Mm-hmm.
I have not been to Lebanon, but I am working with a bunch of guys. I'm working with a guy who grew up there, and with a bunch of guys who have spent time there. And one of these guys is he's a retired Canadian military guy, and he said Lebanon, Beirut specifically, is his favorite city in the world for two reasons. And they're somewhat contradictory, but it's really interesting. Reason number one, he says Beirut is gladiator rules, or law of the jungle. You can do absolutely anything you want there at any moment in time. Nothing is prohibited. But whatever you do will be done to you, so be careful. And number two, he said the people who live there, who have figured out how to live in that environment and be at peace with everyone, are the most generous people you'll ever meet in your whole life. So he was talking about, he was going through the town. He was on like a mission, right? He was doing some kind of, military job or whatever, and he was with, I forget who he was traveling with, but he was traveling with a non-military guy. And they were kind of sneaking their way through the city to try to get intel on somebody. And they needed to spend the night in this neighborhood, and they knew the area pretty well, so they knew that they could just go up to one of the houses. They went to one of the houses. They knocked on the door. This lady answers the door. Doesn't speak their language at all. They don't speak any Arabic at all, and they just kind of communicate with gestures and stuff that they need a place to sleep, and could they stay here? And she said, oh, she gestures them in and is all excited and shows them the house and the family and takes them to their little garden that they have and gives them tea and food, and they spent the night with his family, because the admonition to Muslims is to treat strangers better than yourself. You're always to welcome a stranger in and feed them and give them whatever they need. No exceptions. No exceptions. And he said that that's a teaching of the Quran, depending on how you choose to follow it. But he said he's never found a place where people follow that more. He's never found a place where people adhere to that more strongly than in Beirut, which I found fascinating, because then you can play the thought experiment of a immigrant family wandering through America, coming up to houses and knocking on doors. And I can think of a lot of Americans I know who would invite them in and treat them the same way. And I can also think of a lot of Americans I know who would not do that.
Huh. Yeah.
But it's getting away from statism. Let's talk about what a Christian should do if that happens.
I think it's pretty obvious.
I think it's fairly obvious, too. And that changes the discussion of mothers and their children at the border in, Texas or Arizona or California or New Mexico. What should they, outside of the paradigm of the state, if somebody sneaks across the border and comes up to your house, and knocks on the door and needs help or needs a place to stay, do you call Border Patrol, or, what do you do? Well, how do you believe that the teaching of Christ applies?
Yeah, you don't call Border Patrol.
You don't even need to have the political conversation. It's not even relevant.
Right. Well, everyone hung up on us. If you want to get a part of the conversation here, it's 907-458-8255. And so there is a thought out there that there is a immigration problem. Okay? And so it may be easy for us. Some things are easier for us, the three of us, than it is for other people. Like, because because we've gone through the thought process already.
Well, there's always been an immigration problem. There's I mean, think about it.
That's a
You had the Spanish, you had the French, you had the British.
Yeah, the Incas were probably like, man, we got a serious immigration problem going on here. Who invited them?
Then you had the Africans, and then you had...
Yeah. But I think the reason I brought that up is because, you know, if you think there is that problem, there is a solution to it, and well, we've already kind of touched on it. Get rid of the incentive that you think's there. You know, who's the one that provides that incentive? It's the state.
Yeah.
And the people that say, tell them to go back home and fix their own stinking place first, then get out of there too.
But they'll also, complain and moan about their own government. We got to fix this or that. We'll go fix it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're just as inept to fix their government as anyone here is to fix this government. So it's a meaningless statement.
Well, isn't that go back to the pull the plank out of your eye before you pull the speck out of your brother's eye?
Yeah.
All right, we got a caller here. Again, the phone number is 907-458-8255. Hello, caller. Thanks for calling in.
Hey, what do you guys think of the idea is if there's a need for cheap labor, or definitely a demand for cheap labor, remember when cheap labor used to be kids and they would work and do that stuff, and instead of sitting in the government indoctrination center sponging off taxpayers, they're actually providing products and value to their society and learning.
And keeping their families from starving.
And actually learning the whole purpose of school is supposed to be so you can work, but why not just skip that whole 12-year process of sitting and staring at a government bureaucrat to just go to work? After 12 years of government indoctrination, they have to demand a minimum wage.
Call it a day.
Then there wouldn't be that much, immigration. We wouldn't have to import other people to use their cheap labor. We'd have our own back, and they'd be learning, not sponging off of me.
Yeah, I'm totally against child labor laws. They're stupid.
Because I don't know, I'm one of these ones that is kind of scared about the immigration thing. And that why is it that the Libertarian Party is so predominantly white? And why is it that lots of free market ideas, free market principles and a free society, a high living standard society, why is it just white people? I mean, is that just a coincidence, or is there something deeper beneath the surface, and that maybe this importation of a bunch of other people that is largely government subsidized may actually destroy something that will take tens of thousands of years to get back?
Well, that's why I was saying to get rid of the government subsidized part, and I think a lot of the problem goes away. But you brought up a good question. Why? And I think a lot of it was because let's go back a few hundred years, and I'm going to go on a limb here, maybe get in trouble. The Northern Europeans, they were a different kind of a people because they had to survive. It was much harder to survive in, say, Germany or in Norway. It's a lot harder to survive in Northern Europe than it was down in the Middle East or in Africa or different places where the climate was a lot nicer and stuff grew on trees. You didn't have to worry about freezing to death and stuff like that. And in that survival, somehow they realized that a better way, one of the things they needed to survive was this thing of property rights, which is where, libertarianism, if you take that word back, it came from Northern Europe. And over a long, long, long process. But, yeah, those ideas came from Europe. And those are good ideals. And I think part of it was because it was harder to live. And property rights had to be established because that helped them survive even longer and better and whatever.
Now, what's going to be the consequences of bringing a bunch of people from a different type of upbringing, different type of, let's say, conditioning, and just import them and drop them off in the middle of the said society? I mean, what is going to be the outcome of that? And, when you talk about responding from fear. I mean, I don't know. Fear is a natural instinct that protects many animals in the wild.
No, that's true. No, that's a good question. That's kind of what I was alluding to earlier. There are people that see a problem here, and you have a valid point of what do these people do when they get here? Now, I don't know for sure how many people are coming in or how many people are actually here or how many people are being put in a certain area or whatever. So I don't know how that. I've heard there's some kind of is it Wisconsin or something? They brought in a bunch of immigrants.
Minnesota was a good one.
Was it Minnesota?
They brought in a bunch of Somalis and they took over the government and they got in positions where they work government jobs. That's where lots of these people get stuck, is working government jobs. And what they ended up doing was embezzling half of the funding for some kind of kids program. Millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars was stolen, put in suitcases, and flown back to, I think they got them from, Somalia. They flew them back there, and lots of that money was used to fund terrorism. That's where Minnesota is where their ancestors come from. Where did they come from, and what kind of people are them? A very high trust society. And then you have, you bring a bunch of people from that will exploit that trust, and nobody wants to say anything. You got a bunch of minorities working at the public office. You don't want to be in there. Well, this is kind of fishy. These people barely speak English, and then when they're taking their money and fleeing back home, it's like, they want it for their people better. I mean, you can't. That bond still is there somewhere.
I think there's something. I think we're talking about two different things though, with an immigrant coming here versus state plopping people from one place to another.
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be a different thing. And then, if you look at them as individuals, they're rotten individuals. Sure not every one of them was a piece of crap.
To neglect group averages and group, I mean, this is where we get into crime and criminality, IQ rates, and it's just this is where that big divide in libertarianism is. I mean, as you guys go get with people like Stefan Molyneux and Lou Rockwell, they make some pretty good cases for why that maybe this importation isn't exactly something that we should be. How to use the state to solve it? I don't know, or how to get the state out of the way. I don't know, but there could be massive consequences to this flooding Europe and flooding North America with people that aren't of our same genetics. I mean,
there could be, and I don't know exactly how to. I just want to get the state out of it, because I think once the state's out of it, a lot of those problems that are happening in the first place don't happen. I'm not trying to be naive either. I'm saying that people should, use their gumption, use the energy that they're using to say, I'm against this, focus it in the right direction, and use that focus. Because if there's a problem, focus it. Where is the problem actually coming from? Who is the perpetrator of the problem? And focus that there.
And let's not forget that the conversation started with people coming over the border from Mexico and having their kids taken away, which is completely different than importing someone intentionally from Somalia. And you look at Somalia. Somalia was in a situation where the UN demanded that it have a state. The U.S. went in and started paying off warlords to go out and collect heads of their enemies. And so much of the violence and terrorism that occurred in Somalia was actually paid for by the U.S., and it's documented in a film documentary called Dirty Wars, put out a few years ago. So it's a very different thing that we're talking about, people from Somalia being intentionally flown over versus a family just wandering across the border to look for a better life.
Sure, and it's nothing on them, but it didn't get to the point where, how does it benefit me? Is this going to make my prodigy, me and my life, better or worse? And that's, that's unknowable.
Sure.
But, you can look at what happened to California. California basically lets a bunch of them in, lets them stay there, and look at what if you think becoming California would be a good thing to sweep across America, I don't, unless you can somehow say, hey, when you come across the border, why don't we just let go of this idea of government? Otherwise, I'm just going to say, no, I don't want more people getting behind the power of government that have shown that they're not really freedom-oriented.
I agree.
I got a question for the caller. This is really, really solid call, really good thinking. Josh Bennett and I have talked about this privately. So I agree, there are cultural differences. And Molyneux makes some very interesting points with stuff like there's a bunch of IQ research, coming out on demographic groups and everything. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting and very difficult to figure out what to do with that. But something we've talked about is what culture do social justice warriors come from? Do they not come from the same culture that these white libertarians come from?
Yeah, communism, I think, yes, as a form of leftism.
So, Marxism, Murray Rothbard has the same lineage as Karl Marx, kind of, right? He's a white, highly educated guy in a wealthy country. And so it's possible.
Well, you could say white, but do they define themselves as white? Does Rothbard say he's white? Does Karl Marx say he's white?
Molyneux would say he's Caucasian.
Right?
Okay. Right? Okay, so is it possible, let's say, Ashkenazi Jews have the highest IQ of any group of people, if we're going to talk about groups, right? You're familiar with this?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So, and then, but they have bad geospatial awareness. Like, they're really good at language and visual arts and things like this, but they don't have good geospatial awareness. Northern Europeans have kind of the second highest IQ as a group, and they have good geospatial awareness. So they're better at building things, but not as good at literature and art. Okay, so let's just make a blanket statement. Let's say that white people are the smartest people on the planet, which it's fraught with challenges. But let's say intelligence has nothing to do with liberty. Let's say you can be intelligent and be a total tyrant. Where do nuclear weapons come? Those come from the most intelligent people on the planet. Where does Marxism and Nazism and socialism come from? The most intelligent people on the planet. So to say that quote unquote less intelligent groups should be excluded because they're not compatible with freedom, well, I think we've established that more intelligent groups don't appear to be compatible with freedom either.
Well,
I could be wrong about that.
Agreed. But that's
so there's
on the
way
assumption that everybody's making this decision thinking that, but I don't know the percentage of people, but I would say a large percentage of the people believe we're all exactly the same and all groups are exactly the same. They've been taught a lie. Right. So they're going on information that's a lie.
Yeah.
So when you say that the most intelligent groups that are doing this, they're fed wrong information. Well, I can't say that, but as far as what I understand it, that's incorrect. That's not. So, but no, that's a good point.
Let's figure out an action item, though. I think there's an action item here, which is that this is something Jordan Peterson's talked about. It's to Canadians specifically. Canadian conservatives get almost none of the vote from the immigrants in Canada, and the Canadian immigration process is very rigorous. So most of the immigrants that make it from Asia or from India or wherever, even Iraq and Lebanon, there's a bunch from there too. They're all white, high skilled, right? They end up in skilled labor jobs almost immediately, if not first generation, then second generation. And he said, "Why are you guys not recruiting the conservatives? Or why are the conservatives not recruiting the immigrants? All of the immigrants from India want lower taxes. All of them want less government regulation. All of them want more control over their families."
Well, why are they voting for Democrats then?
Because the conservatives are so scared of brown people because their genetics aren't right. They can't see past the skin color to see that their ideology is perfectly aligned. And I believe that libertarians, and especially the alt-right, have the same exact problem. I think libertarianism is hyper, super compatible with immigrants. And I think the alt-right and these xenophobic libertarians are missing the opportunity of the century to recruit them. So they can't see past the tip of their precious Aryan white nose. It's pathetic.
To recruit them, then, I mean, why did you? See, that's the emphasis on. We're going to bring all these people in. Right now, they're going to vote against you, but it's your job to convince them not to. Well, we're going to keep letting them come in and take control of the government. But why?
I don't think so. I think it's just your job. I think it's just your job as someone who believes in freedom to reach out to new people in your society and say, hey, there's a third way. Welcome to my society. Most of the people you'll meet will tell you that you either need to be violent this way or violent this way. And I'm here to tell you there's a third way. There's a way of peace.
What do the numbers show is happening, though? When these guys are coming into these countries, is the crime rate going up? Is violent crime going up or violent crime going down?
This is not about the numbers.
Victimized because, well, what do you mean?
It's not about the numbers.
Hold on.
This is about what you as an individual can do in your life and your society. If you want to spend your life worrying about statistics, you will get nowhere.
I think there's
if you're going to live your life and not look at statistics, you're going to go on faulty information and not base your argument or your active decision on information.
I think, let me jump in here. I think one of the things that Dave's pointing out is that it's from both sides too, is preconceived notions. If an immigrant comes in and automatically thinks the right hates them because they're an immigrant, they're going to embrace the left. To whereas the some on the right have a preconceived notion that they're here just to get on welfare, and so they're going to hate the immigrant. So you have these two hatreds.
That's straw man, because that's not my position. That's not a lot of people's position. A lot of people's position is they're still not going to benefit me.
I said some.
They're still not going to be a benefit.
I didn't say you, but what I'm saying is there's a preconceived notion of what Dave was saying and what Peterson was trying to point out was open your arms to them when they come. They're here. They're coming. Win them over.
Yeah, no, that's a good plan too. I hope that works. I mean, I hope some kind of peaceful resolution comes out of it.
I'm not sure that it's not going to always happen. I mean, we can't even win over our own American fellows who are supposed to love freedom.
No, there's a bunch of they got a long way to go too.
All right, well, we're at the end of the show, man, but I appreciate your call. It's a great conversation.
Good show.
Yeah, super fun.
Appreciate it.
Talk to you guys later.
Yep. Sorry to the callers that we didn't get to, but we'll probably have to open this up again because it's a fun discussion, and it bends my brain because I have to think. I mean, when you get good calls like that too, I mean, you got to bring up good points like, okay, now I better go think this one over. It's great. Dave, got anything closing you want to say?
No, super good. I would just say, as individualists, we should endeavor not to fall into the trap of groupthink.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for Patriots Lament on this day before Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. Hope you have a good day. Spend the time with your family. Forget about work and all that crap. Just chill out for the day. We'll see you guys next week. Press the button.
Thanks for welcome to Health Talk. My name is Dr. Scott Looper, and I'm your host today as we talk about health, how to get it, and how to keep it. Our guest today is John Risser. John's a local hiker and coordinates events for the local hiking club. Today we're talking about getting outside and looking around. John, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
So, John, tell us about hiking.